So first, we just thought we would break out and just define each of these for you. And we thought maybe we'll go around and say what each of these, means to us or how we may define them. So the first one, the D, being diversity, I always say that it's having a range of different dimensions. I like saying the word dimension because there's so many facets that go with that in itself. So that would be racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, different cultural backgrounds, various lifestyles, experiences, all of the things that make us who we are, and having that diverse level of participation, involvement, being a human in itself. So I'll pass it on to Charis to add to that or provide your own definition.
Thank you. Yeah, I was sitting here thinking while you were talking, it's definitely a range. And it's, I think when I think diversity, I think about identity and culture and environment, where we come from in terms of what has shaped our life, whether that's the community around us or what's going on in our biological bodies, to, how society impacts our movement through the world. And I think about all of those groups together is what diversity is.
And to me, diversity, kind of what you guys were saying, it's about a variety, it's dimensions, but it's also just making sure that everyone, right, is included. So diversity is including every single person from different cultures, different backgrounds, lifestyles that are living in different environments, different places. So it's a little bit of everything. And that's really what diversity is bringing a little bit of everything to the table, kind of like the conversations that we are having here. I love that just in this panel, there is diversity. And, that's what we want to see. We want to see everyone represented.
Absolutely. And before we go into the other letters in here, I think that it's very in keeping with why we do the show is we want to have all voices at the table, all of those perspectives, all of those opinions. And I started this off by saying this topic is so big. We literally, there was a fourth co-host. Shout out to Carrie, who said at the last minute, there's so much to say. I'm going to just bow out for now, but that's okay because this show called AiArthritis Voices 360 in 2022, we started 360 It's. And what that means is any topic, any topic we feel like we need to talk about more, any comment made on the show is fair game to spiral out into another conversation in many different mediums. That could be video, social media, email, text, you name it. Anything goes if it's conversation, because we want all of you to be able to also be included. So just because we're starting the conversation here, that's exactly what we're doing. We're starting it and we're inviting you all to then continue the conversation as we dive in deeper past the end point of the show today, which will include Carrie. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So let's get back here. So let's go to the E as we go into equity. And did anyone else want to start on this one? I started on the last one.
I can start. So to me, equity means being able to provide and meet the person where they're at. So this means providing the services or equitable services to the individual, whether it is in healthcare or anywhere. So meeting the person where they're at and assessing their needs first and foremost. So that's how I feel with equity. Some people may need a little more help than others. Some people need more or less assistance. So meeting everyone where they're at.
I love that. Charis?
Yeah, I want to go. I think there's no wrong answer, right? When you think about DEIA and you're familiar with the acronym and the concept of all these, and just building off what Estela said, I think, thinking about equity is, about removing external forces that prevent someone from participating fully. Barriers is another word for that. And I don't think I can say much more than that other than repeating myself.
No, I think those are both very excellent, and I think visually, if you just we've had different diagrams that maybe you have all seen. We were looking at some before this, and just understanding that some people require, in order to get to the level of care or treatments or whatever that is that we're trying to achieve, some people are going to need a little bit more help, like Estella, like Paris were saying, in order so that we all are equal, so that we all have that equal opportunity or that equal level. So it's not a jumbly line of one person's higher than the other. We just need to fill in that gap on the underneath so that we all end up equal at the top. So um, next, inclusion, and I think we talk about that a whole lot at AiArthritis, and the importance of representation, the importance of people being able to be included, their voices to be counted as equals. I really am very, that to me, the equal part is extremely important, and that they feel welcome and they feel valued and they feel heard. So, Stella, did you want to add to that?
To me, I think when I think of inclusion, it's not just having the person be there, but also having them feel included, feel heard, and given the opportunity to be present and supported.
Great. Carice?
Yeah, I struggle with the difference between equity and inclusion, honestly. And I think there's overlap with all of these. But in my mind, I'm thinking like all the words and terms I'm thinking about relate to equity. Like I'm thinking about the word centering those most impacted. And that's equity, but it's
Hmm.
also part of inclusion. And I think about people participating fully in something as inclusion, as full inclusion.
I can see that, and we talked about this as we were planning out the show as well. And we started with an outline and said this is D and E and E and I and D, and we went back and forth. And so that's one of the reasons I thought it would be fun to try and zero in, and what does each individual word, what kind of meaning can that have as well?
Yeah, I wanted to add another thing. I think we need to remember that we all bring our identities with us wherever we go. And a big part of inclusion is that people are there with their identities. It's not regardless of how you identify. It's almost because of how you identify, you are included, if that makes sense.
Yes, and to me, I think, you also need to feel like you're welcomed, and feel that you are valued because, to me, I feel that one of the things that we see a lot and it's that's with equity, you provide the space, but it's not just about providing the space for the person. It is about making sure that they feel that they are valued and that they're contributing. And so I think that's where, there's so much overlap and it could be so confusing, but it's about how the individual, to me, how they feel.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the final letter, or accessibility. And I'm going to let Carice lead on this one.
Where do I start? I mean, as someone who, sees disability as my primary identity, accessibility is a big part of my life in terms of how I'm able to move through the world. And I mean, infrastructurally, I don't even know if that's a word, as well as like socially and culturally. And so I see accessibility as a framework that allows people to have inclusion and equity, and that includes diverse populations. So it's beyond disability as well. So I might have gotten ahead of myself a little there. So I think I'll pass that off to the two of you.
Did you want to go, Estela?
Yes. So, a lot of times, to me, when I think of something accessible, it's not just having it presented to the individual, but ensuring that they are actually understanding what is being handed to them and what information is being provided. And, providing like a resource like this where we're communicating on video and people can hear us. There are people that may not be able to see us, that may not be able to hear us. So ensuring that the information that is provided and or resources or anything really care is that it is accessible to everyone, despite of who they are or their conditions or their disabilities.
No, absolutely. And I agree with both of you. I had put on myself this inclusiveness of all people and how they need to process information. That's how I had summarized it myself. So I thought before we branch out and talk a little bit more, we have a lot of topics too. Goodness. So narrowing it down was hard, but let me say again, trust me, this conversation is not going to end at the end of the show today. So I thought that we would just take a minute just to be human and just talk a little bit about any personal experience with DEIA that we wanted to bring to the forefront today and thinking this, wow, this is really important to discuss. And I'll turn it over to Estela first.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I see the most is, healthcare literacy. So even though you may have the access to healthcare, you may speak the same language, perhaps, the provider speaks the same language you do, but understanding and having, that access to the information, understanding and being able to process it, I think is one of the things that I've seen the most. And I'll give you an example. My mom actually, has a couple of conditions, chronic conditions, including some osteoarthritis. And one of the things that we realized is even though some providers do speak Spanish and there is that barrier, there are some times where they come and or they speak a different type of lingo, I want to say, because some words, even though they're Spanish, they mean something completely different in Mexico versus another country that may speak Spanish as well. So I think for me, that's one of the things that I've seen the most. So interpreter services, one of the things that we need to do is kind of look at, what kind of interpretation and how are we really delivering the message to the individual, and if the individual is actually understanding what they're being provided. So that's one example of, accessibility. And again, it's a language barrier that we don't really always talk about.
Charis?
Yeah. I mean, what example do I pick? It's part of, all of us experience discrimination on this call in some way, whether it's because of gender or race or poverty, class. And so a lot of these we carry with us, a lot of the concepts in DEIA. I want to briefly talk about where the identities intersect that we have. And so I'm a trans person, I live in poverty, and I'm disabled. And I mentioned earlier that we carry all of our identities with us all the time. And that impacts how we navigate every environment, every interaction. And I think a lot about healthcare, like Estela was talking about, where I have to decide with every new doctor appointment whether or not to say that I use they, them pronouns, because I don't know how they'll react. And I know that may impact how they approach treating me. And the way that intersects with me living with multiple chronic conditions, that can have a huge impact on my life if the doctor decides not to treat me because of that. So And healthcare is a huge environment where DEIA work is really important. So I'm glad Estela brought that up and reminded me that that is sort of my primary environment where I experience these issues.